The crystalline spires of Harmony Station sparkled against the backdrop of swirling nebulae, its elegant architecture a testament to interstellar cooperation. Thomas Reed stood at the panoramic observation window, his diplomatic uniform pristine but his shoulders tense with the weight of his mission. As Earth's newest ambassador to the Galactic Council, he carried humanity's hopes for stronger alien alliances. The soft chime of approaching footsteps drew his attention. Through the reflection in the window, he caught sight of an ethereal figure, tall and graceful, with iridescent silver skin that seemed to capture and reflect the starlight. The alien dignitary wore formal robes in deep purple, but it was the subtle dark trim that caught Thomas's eye, a universal symbol of mourning among many species. "I apologize for disturbing your solitude," the alien said, her translator giving her words a melodious quality. "I am Ambassador Nyara of the Celestial Concordat." Thomas turned, offering a respectful bow. "Ambassador Thomas Reed of Earth. Please, you're not disturbing anything. The view is meant to be shared." Nyara moved to stand nearby, her large opalescent eyes fixed on the cosmic display. "Your species has an interesting way of finding beauty in the chaos of space. Most find these energetic nebulae disturbing. Perhaps we're still new enough to space travel to be amazed rather than unsettled," Thomas replied thoughtfully. "Though I suspect there's always something new to discover, even for species as advanced as the Concordat." A shadow passed across Nyara's features. "My mate used to say something similar. He was a xenoanthropologist, fascinated by emerging spacefaring races like yours." Her voice carried a depth of loss that transcended species barriers. Thomas recognized the present tense shifting to past, a grief he understood too well. "I'm sorry for your loss, Ambassador. If you don't mind me asking, was he studying humanity?" "Please, call me Nyara," she said softly. "And yes, Keeler was particularly interested in human resilience. How your species faces tragedy and loss, yet maintains hope." She turned those striking eyes toward him. He would have appreciated the irony of this moment. Thomas felt an unexpected connection forming, not the usual diplomatic pleasantries, but something more genuine. Sometimes the universe has a strange way of bringing the right people together at the right time. "I lost my partner 3 years ago during first contact. Caroline was a xenolinguist, she would have loved meeting you." Nyara's bioluminescent markings pulsed gently, a sign of emotional resonance among her people. "Among the Concordat, we believe shared grief can forge stronger bonds than shared joy. Yet few species truly understand this concept." "Humans might," Thomas offered. "We have an old saying, grief shared is grief halved." Their conversation flowed naturally after that, moving from personal loss to cultural exchange. Thomas learned that the Celestial Concordat measured time in stellar cycles, that they processed grief through complex harmonic rituals, and that Nyara had been instrumental in preventing several interspecies conflicts through her diplomatic work. As station's artificial day cycle began to dim, simulating evening, Thomas realized they had talked for hours. More importantly, he realized he had laughed for the first time in months, a genuine laugh, sparked by Nyara's amusingly accurate observations about human diplomatic protocols. "The council session begins tomorrow," Nyara said, her tone carrying a note of reluctance to end their conversation. "I suspect we will be on opposing sides of several key issues." Thomas smiled warmly. "Perhaps that's exactly why this conversation needed to happen today. It's harder to view someone as just an opposing vote when you've shared stories about your past." "Indeed." Nyara's markings shimmered with what Thomas was beginning to recognize as amusement. "Though I warn you, Ambassador Reed, understanding does not mean I will concede on matters important to my people." "I would expect nothing less," he replied, feeling more optimistic about the upcoming negotiations than he had in weeks. "And please, call me Thomas." As they parted ways, Thomas couldn't help but feel that something significant had shifted in the station's carefully maintained diplomatic atmosphere. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight had reminded him why he had chosen this path, the moment when artificial barriers fell away and real understanding began. What neither of them knew was that their chance encounter would soon prove far more important than either could imagine, as forces beyond their control were already in motion that would test the bounds of their newfound connection. The council chambers of Harmony Station hummed with tension as representatives from a dozen species debated the proposed mining rights treaty. Thomas sat at the human delegations table, carefully reviewing the latest proposals on his datapad. Across the circular chamber, Nyara stood addressing the council, her silver skin catching the light as she gestured elegantly. The Concordat cannot support unrestricted mining in the Cygnus Reach, she stated firmly. The quantum crystalline formations there are vital to our people's long-range communications network. Thomas felt the weight of Earth's desperate need for those same resources. The growing human colonies required rare minerals found abundantly in that region. Yet as he watched Nyara speak, he remembered their conversation about her late mate's respect for humanity's potential. Rising to his feet, Thomas activated his speaking crystal. "If I may, Honorable Council?" At the Chief Administrator's nod, he continued. "Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle. Instead of dividing the region, what if we explored cooperative mining techniques?" Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Nyara's opalescent eyes fixed on him with keen interest as he elaborated. Human mining engineers have developed new extraction methods that minimize crystalline disruption. Combined with Concordat communication expertise, we might be able to harvest the minerals without compromising the natural quantum networks. The session extended late into the station's night cycle as details were debated and refined. When they finally recessed, Thomas felt drained but hopeful. He was gathering his materials when Nyara approached his table. "That was unexpected," she said, her translator conveying a mix of surprise and appreciation. "Few species would suggest sharing proprietary technology." Thomas smiled wearily. "Sometimes the best solutions require us to be vulnerable first. Would you like to discuss the technical details over dinner? The station's atrium restaurant has gravitational settings for both our species." Their dinner conversation ranged far beyond mining protocols. Nyara shared stories about her people's first ventures into space, while Thomas described Earth's ongoing adaptation to galactic society. As they talked, he noticed her bioluminescent patterns creating increasingly complex designs, something he remembered from their previous conversation indicated deep engagement. "You know," Nyara said thoughtfully, "Keeler would have seen today's session as proof of his theories about human adaptability. Your willingness to find middle ground, to share knowledge rather than claim territory, it's rather remarkable for such a young spacefaring race." "We've learned hard lessons about the cost of conflict," Thomas replied. "And personally, I've found that loss has a way of shifting perspective. Caroline's death during first contact taught me that every interaction with a new species is precious, even when it's challenging." Nyara's markings pulsed with empathy. "Among my people, we have a concept called resonant understanding, when two beings from different worlds find their grief patterns align. It's considered sacred." Before Thomas could respond, his comm unit chimed urgently. The message made his blood run cold. Long-range sensors had detected unauthorized mining ships entering the Cygnus Reach, flying Earth colors but operating without official sanction. "I have to go," he said, standing quickly. "There's a situation dash." "I just received similar news," Nyara interjected, her own communication implant glowing softly. "These ships, they're not authorized by your government?" "No," Thomas confirmed grimly. "Likely independent operators trying to stake claims before the treaty is finalized. This could destroy everything we've worked for today." Nyara stood, her robes shimmering with purposeful energy. "Then we must respond together. The Concordat has patrol ships in the sector, and if they're coordinating with Earth authorities rather than acting alone. They rushed from the restaurant, their shared meal forgotten in the crisis." As they hurried through the station's corridors, Thomas realized that their personal connection had created something invaluable, trust during a crisis that could have otherwise sparked serious diplomatic incidents. The next several hours became a blur of emergency communications, coordinated fleet movements, and diplomatic maneuvering. Working side by side in the station's command center, Thomas and Nyara found an efficient rhythm. Her understanding of Concordat patrol protocols complemented his knowledge of human mining operations, allowing them to track and intercept the illegal ships without bloodshed. As the crisis wound down, with the unauthorized vessels captured and their crews detained, Thomas found himself watching Nyara coordinate with her fleet commanders. Her movements were precise, her decisions confident, but he could see the subtle signs of exhaustion in her posture. "You know," he said softly when she finished her last transmission, "I think we just wrote a new chapter in human Concordat relations. One that might not have been possible if we hadn't shared those stories about Keeler and Caroline." Nyara's markings created a pattern he hadn't seen before, something between amusement and affection. Perhaps they're watching us now, proud that their legacies live on in unexpected ways. As they stood together in the command center, watching the final reports come in, Thomas realized that something profound had shifted between them. Their shared grief had created a foundation, but their response to this crisis had built something new upon it, a partnership that transcended both diplomatic necessity and personal loss. The aftermath of the mining crisis brought unexpected changes to Harmony Station. The successful cooperation between human and Concordat forces had caught the attention of the Galactic Council, leading to increased responsibilities for both Thomas and Nyara. They found themselves appointed to a special joint committee on interspecies resource management, which meant long hours working together. One evening, after a particularly challenging session discussing enforcement protocols, Thomas noticed Nyara's bioluminescent patterns showing signs of distress, subtle fluctuations he'd learned to recognize over the past weeks. "Would you join me for a walk in the botanical gardens?" he suggested. "I hear they've just installed a new zero-gravity section with specimens from both our worlds." The gardens were a marvel of xenobotanical engineering, with carefully maintained environments for plants from dozens of worlds. As they entered the zero-gravity chamber, Thomas watched in amazement as luminescent flowers from the Concordat homeworld danced with terrestrial orchids in a weightless ballet. "Keeler would have loved this," Nyara said softly, her hand brushing against a floating bloom. "He always said that gardens were the perfect metaphor for interspecies cooperation, different forms of life finding ways to thrive together." Thomas watched as her markings shifted to the deep blues of remembrance. "Tell me about him," he said gently. "What was he like?" As they drifted among the floating gardens, Nyara shared stories of her late mate's passion for cultural understanding, his sometimes awkward attempts to learn human customs, and his dream of seeing their peoples work together as equals. In turn, Thomas spoke of Caroline's dedication to bridging communication gaps between species, her quick laugh, and her final moments trying to establish peaceful contact with a panicked alien vessel. "The hardest part," Nyara admitted, her voice carrying harmonics of deep emotion, "is that among my people, mates share a subtle biological bond. When Keeler died, I physically felt the connection break. Sometimes I still reach for it, like probing a missing tooth." Thomas moved closer, careful to maintain appropriate distance while showing support. "Caroline and I had been married for 12 years. Sometimes I still turn to tell her something before remembering she's gone. I don't think that ever completely goes away, we just learn to carry it differently." "Your species has remarkable insight into grief," Nyara observed, her markings shifting to warmer hues. "Most races we encounter either deny death's impact or become consumed by it. Humans seem to find a middle path." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the council chamber. A trading convoy had reported unusual energy readings from the quantum crystalline formations they'd been working to protect. The patterns matched neither human nor Concordat technology. As they rushed to investigate, Thomas realized how naturally they'd fallen into sync, Nyara already accessing Concordat sensor data while he contacted Earth's scientific division. Their shared experiences had created an efficiency that transcended standard diplomatic protocols. The mystery deepened as they analyzed the readings. The energy signatures suggested someone was attempting to artificially replicate the quantum networks, but with a crude understanding that risked destabilizing the entire formation. "Look at these harmonic patterns," Nyara said, her scientific background evident as she manipulated the holographic display. "They're trying to force connections that should develop naturally. It's like watching someone try to make a garden grow by pulling on the plants." Thomas studied the data, remembering Caroline's work on interspecies communication. What if they're not trying to replicate the network, but communicate through it? These patterns, they're rhythmic, almost like someone knocking on a door, Nyara finished, her markings pulsing with excitement. An unknown species, perhaps, trying to make contact the only way they know how. They worked through the station's night cycle, combining concordat understanding of quantum harmonics with human pattern recognition software. As they decoded the crude signals, Thomas found himself repeatedly glancing at Nyara, amazed by how her scientific mind complemented his diplomatic instincts. "You know," he said during a brief break, watching her elegant fingers dance across the holographic controls, "I think this is what both Keeler and Caroline would have wanted, their work continuing through us, bringing peoples together in new ways." Nyara's markings created that pattern he'd come to recognize as deep affection. There is an old concordat belief that those we lose never truly leave us. Their energy becomes part of the quantum web that connects all living things. Perhaps they guided us to this moment. As the first translated messages began to appear, simple greetings from a civilization that had discovered the quantum formations by accident, Thomas felt a profound sense of rightness. Here they were, two beings who had lost so much, helping to ensure another species' first contact would be peaceful and controlled. "We're going to need to brief the council," Thomas said, already organizing his thoughts. "This could change everything we thought we knew about the quantum networks." Nyara's hand brushed his arm, sending a warm tingle through him. "We will face it together, as we have everything else. After all, we seem to have a knack for turning potential disasters into opportunities for growth." Looking at her, Thomas saw not just an alien diplomat or even a friend, but someone who had become essential to his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. Their shared grief had created a foundation, but it was their shared hope for the future that was building something new, something neither of them had expected to find again. The discovery of the new species attempting to communicate through the quantum crystalline networks had far-reaching consequences. As Thomas and Nyara presented their findings to the Galactic Council, the chamber erupted into chaos. Several species saw the newcomers as a threat to established trade routes, while others worried about technological contamination. "We cannot risk another primitive species gaining access to quantum network technology," the Meridian representative argued, their crystalline form vibrating with concern. "The formations must be isolated immediately." Thomas felt Nyara tense beside him, her markings flickering with carefully controlled emotion. They both knew isolation would likely kill the fledgling civilization trying to reach out to the stars. Before either could respond, emergency alerts blared throughout the station. Multiple ships detected entering the Cygnus Reach, the station's AI announced. Energy signatures match no known species. The council chamber's main display activated, showing a fleet of bizarre vessels seemingly grown rather than built, their organic hulls pulsing with otherworldly energy. They were heading straight for the quantum crystalline formations. "Those aren't the same signatures we detected earlier," Nyara said, quickly analyzing the data. "This is something else entirely." Thomas moved to the central platform, his diplomatic training kicking in. "Honorable Council, we need to act quickly. Whatever these ships are, they pose a clear threat to both the formations and the species trying to contact us." The next hours became a blur of activity. Thomas and Nyara found themselves at the heart of the crisis, coordinating responses between human, concordat, and council forces. Their earlier work together proved invaluable as they anticipated each other's moves, filling gaps in their respective species' capabilities. The ships are using some kind of quantum resonance technology, Nyara reported, her markings pulsing with urgency. They're attempting to harvest the crystalline formations, but their methods are causing dangerous instabilities. Thomas studied the tactical display, remembering something from their earlier research. The new species we detected, their attempt to communicate created specific harmonic patterns in the quantum network. What if we could use those patterns to disrupt whatever these ships are doing? Nyara's eyes widened with understanding. Like using counterharmonics to cancel out destructive vibrations. But we'd need to get much closer to the formations. I'll go, Thomas said immediately. The human ships have better shielding against quantum disruptions. No, Nyara countered, her markings showing both concern and determination. The Concordat understands quantum harmonics better than any other species. I should dash. We go together, Thomas interrupted, reaching for her hand. Your knowledge, my ship's protection. We've proven we work better as a team. The council chamber erupted in protests about protocol and chain of command, but Thomas barely heard them. He was focused on Nyara's expression as her markings shifted through complex patterns before settling into the clear, bright colors of decision. Together, she agreed. They raced to the diplomatic docking bay where Thomas's ship, the Earth Bridge, waited. As they prepared for launch, Thomas couldn't help but notice how naturally Nyara integrated herself into his crew, her Concordat insights immediately improving their sensor capabilities. The journey to the quantum formations was tense. The unknown ships had already begun their harvest, sending destructive waves of energy through the delicate crystal structures. As they approached, Nyara worked frantically at the science station, attempting to replicate the harmonic patterns they discovered. The formations are becoming dangerously unstable, she reported. If we don't stop this soon, the resulting quantum cascade could affect systems across multiple sectors. Thomas piloted them closer, trusting Nyara's calculations as they navigated through increasing distortions. How much closer do you need? Almost there, she said, her markings intense with concentration. But Thomas, generating these counterharmonics will create a feedback loop through any biological system connected to the quantum network. He understood what she wasn't saying. As a Concordat, she was naturally attuned to these energies. Generating the counterharmonics would cause her immense pain. There has to be another way, he argued, even as the unknown ships began to take notice of their presence. There isn't time, Nyara said softly. Sometimes, as you humans say, we must risk everything for what matters most. Her markings shifted to a pattern he'd never seen before, something profound and personal. Thank you, Thomas, for helping me remember how to live again. Before he could respond, she initiated the harmonic sequence. The effect was immediate and devastating. The unknown ship's harvest fields began to collapse, their organic hulls writhing as the counterharmonics disrupted their technology. But Thomas barely noticed, his attention fixed on Nyara as she fought to maintain the pattern despite obvious agony. Acting on instinct, he reached out and took her hand. To his shock, he felt something, a faint echo of the quantum energies flowing through her, as if their connection had somehow bridged the gap between their species. Her markings flared with surprise and wonder as the pain seemed to ease, distributed somehow between them. Together, they held the counterharmonic pattern until the unknown ships began to retreat, their harvest technology thoroughly disrupted. As the threat receded, Thomas realized he could still feel that faint connection to Nyara, like a whisper of the bond she described losing with Keeler. That shouldn't be possible, she whispered, her markings showing amazement. Humans don't have the biological structures for quantum resonance. Maybe, Thomas said softly, still holding her hand, some connections transcend normal biological limits. In the days following the quantum formation crisis, Harmony Station buzzed with unprecedented activity. The Galactic Council chambers had been converted into a joint scientific and diplomatic center as representatives from dozens of species studied the implications of what had occurred. At the center of it all were Thomas and Nyara, their unexpected quantum connection becoming both a scientific marvel and a symbol of interspecies potential. "The readings are extraordinary," the chief Meridian scientist explained, their crystalline form vibrating with excitement. "We never imagined humans could form quantum resonance bonds. This could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself." Thomas sat patiently through the endless tests and scans, his attention more focused on Nyara than the scientist's theories. The faint connection between them had stabilized into something subtle but permanent, a gentle awareness of each other's presence that felt both foreign and completely natural. "Your scientists seem equally fascinated," he commented to Nyara during a rare quiet moment in the station's arboretum. "Though I notice they're being considerably more discreet about their interest." Nyara's markings shimmered with amusement. "The Concordat has a different approach to unprecedented discoveries. They're currently consulting our oldest quantum archives, trying to find any historical precedent for this kind of cross-species bonding." "And have they found any?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious about how unique their situation was. "No," she replied, her markings shifting to deeper, more serious patterns. "What we share appears to be entirely new. Though perhaps that's fitting, given everything else that's changing." She gestured toward the station's main viewport, where ships from the newly discovered species, now known as the Resonance, were carefully approaching under combined human Concordat escort. Their organic vessels had evolved significantly from their first crude attempts at quantum communication, thanks to careful guidance from both their peoples. "We've created something unprecedented," Thomas reflected. "Not just this connection between us, but a whole new model of species integration. The Council's talking about implementing similar joint mentorship programs for other emerging civilizations." Nyara moved closer, her presence in both physical and quantum space bringing a sense of completeness Thomas hadn't felt since losing Caroline. "It's what Keeler always dreamed of, species helping each other grow rather than competing for dominance. Though I doubt even he imagined it happening quite like this." Thomas thought of Caroline's passion for breaking down barriers between peoples. "They led us to this point, in their own ways. Now we're building something new on the foundation they left us." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with the gentle hum of their quantum connection. Thomas had learned that Concordat culture valued these quiet moments of shared awareness as much as verbal communication. "The Council has offered us a new position," Nyara said finally, her markings creating patterns of possibility. "Joint ambassadors to oversee interspecies development programs. We would work together officially, helping other species navigate first contact and integration into galactic society. Using our experience to ensure other species don't face the same challenges we did," Thomas mused. "It's a significant commitment." "Yes," Nyara agreed, her markings showing both hope and uncertainty. "It would mean formalizing our partnership in ways that go beyond traditional diplomatic protocols. The Concordat has already expressed support for such an arrangement, but I understand if human customs make this more complicated." Thomas smiled, reaching for her hand and feeling their connection brighten at the contact. "Actually, I think humans have a long history of diplomatic marriages bridging cultural divides. Though I doubt any of them involved quantum resonance bonds." Nyara's markings burst into the complex, shimmering patterns he'd learned meant joy. "Is that a formal proposal, Ambassador Reed?" "I believe it is, Ambassador Nyara," he replied, his heart light with certainty. "After all, we've already proven we make an excellent team." The ceremony that followed 2 months later was unprecedented in Council history, a formal union combining human, Concordat, and Council traditions. Representatives from dozens of species attended, including a delegation from the Resonance, their organic ships creating beautiful quantum light displays in celebration. As Thomas and Nyara exchanged vows in multiple languages, their quantum connection humming with shared joy, he reflected on the strange path that had led them here. Two beings from different worlds, each carrying profound loss, had found not just comfort but a new purpose together. The station's observation deck, where they had first met, became their favorite retreat in the years that followed. From there, they would watch new species make their first approaches to Harmony Station, guided by the protocols and programs they had helped develop. Each successful integration, each peaceful first contact, honored the legacies of those they had lost while building something new and hopeful for the future. Their unique bond became legendary among emerging species, a story of how loss could lead to understanding, how differences could become strengths, and how love could transcend not just cultural barriers but the very laws of physics themselves. It was proof that in an infinite universe, there were always new ways to connect, to heal, and to grow together. As they stood together one evening, watching a newly discovered species make their first careful approach to the station, Thomas felt the familiar warmth of their connection and knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where they were meant to be, two souls from different stars, creating light in the darkness between worlds.